Yesterday, the world wept as Pope Francis passed away, tears flooding every street and sanctuary. But while millions were lighting candles, one old man was being pushed to the floor in an airport. He clutched a faded letter and whispered through his tears, "He saved me. Please let me go to him." His voice breaking amidst the mocking laughter of the crowd and the raised fist of a security guard. But at that moment, a figure in a striking red and gold uniform stepped forward, his gaze as sharp as a blade, slicing through the chaos. And in the days that followed, the world would come to glimpse a different side of the Holy Father, not through doctrine, but through the lives he quietly saved. "You think this is some kind of charity line? Move along, old man." The voice cracked through the airport like a stick snapping underfoot in a quiet forest. Sudden, sharp, a little too loud for the surroundings. It didn't match the sterile white glare of the terminal lights, nor the polite hush of early morning travel, but it hit just the same. And it hit hard. All around, people shifted. A few frowned in reflex. A woman pulled her scarf tighter. Someone muttered under their breath. The line at check-in counter 15 writhed like a slow-moving snake. Travelers tugged wheeled suitcases behind them, plastic handles clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. The loudspeaker above crackled with a barely audible boarding announcement in Italian and English, garbled beyond understanding. A child dropped a toy car. It clattered like gunfire across the tile. And in the center of all that noise, barely noticeable unless you were really looking, was Giuseppe. He wasn't tall, and he wasn't upright. His shoulders drooped under the weight of a coat that had long since lost its shape, and his neck dipped slightly forward as if gravity pulled harder on his bones than on the rest of us. He gripped a wooden cane with both hands, as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. His hair, long since turned white, stood up in uneven patches. It made him look like someone who'd just come in from a storm. Giuseppe had traveled all night on a bus, crossing from his small village in southern Italy into the strange sprawl of Rome's Fiumicino airport. He had never flown before. He didn't even know what a boarding pass looked like. The closest he'd ever been to an airplane was seeing their contrails stretch white across a blue sky while he worked his fields. But none of that mattered to him today. "Where's your ticket?" the man behind the counter asked again, less patient this time. Giuseppe blinked, as if woken from prayer. He reached into the front pocket of his coat, slowly, carefully, like he was unwrapping something precious. From the fabric folds emerged a wrinkled cloth bundle, knotted at the corners. He opened it on the counter like it was a sacred offering, revealing a collection of small euro notes, faded coins, and 1 or 2 American quarters that must have snuck in long ago and never found their way out. "I have enough," Giuseppe said, voice gravelly but kind. "I need to go to Vatican City, to St. Peter's, to see the Pope." The clerk, a stocky man in a tight uniform shirt with a badge pinned crookedly to his chest, stared blankly at the offering, unimpressed. His face had the kind of practiced apathy that comes from decades of fielding unreasonable demands, rude tourists, and missed connections. But this was different, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. "You can't pay at the counter, it doesn't work like that," he said flatly, pushing the bundle back. "You don't have a reservation, no confirmation number, no ID." Giuseppe pulled out a tattered wallet and offered an identification card from his region. It was the kind of thing issued locally, useful in small towns but meaningless in international travel. Still, he held it with reverence, as though it were a passport to heaven. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," he said. "I just want to go. I just need a seat, a small one. I'll sit anywhere. It's important." The clerk's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He had other passengers to check in. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some of them had already begun mumbling complaints. "You think this is a joke?" he snapped suddenly, louder now. "This isn't a damn bus stop. You don't just walk in here with pocket change and ask for a miracle." Giuseppe took a half step back, stunned not by the words themselves, but by the tone. It reminded him of being a boy and being chased from the town square when he lingered too long, watching the grown-ups. or of debt collectors slamming fists on the door when he was a young widower with 3 hungry children and not enough land to feed them. A man in line behind him, a tall fellow in a slick business suit and loafers that hadn't seen dirt in years, spoke up next. A man in a suit barked, "Jesus Christ, I've got a meeting in Zurich." "Yeah, get out of the way, Grandpa," said a woman with oversized sunglasses and a rolling bag that probably cost more than Giuseppe's yearly income. Giuseppe didn't move. Couldn't. His hands tightened around the edge of the counter, knuckles pale and dry. His knees quivered beneath him. "I can pay," Giuseppe insisted. "I have to go. The Pope, he saved me." The clerk didn't look moved. He looked irritated. He shoved the money off the counter with the back of his hand. "You gotta be kidding me. Pick that up and get out of the line." Giuseppe hesitated, eyes darting from the scattered coins on the floor to the people behind him, now muttering and shuffling, building like a tide. Then, with one firm push, he shoved Giuseppe backward. It wasn't hard, but it didn't need to be. Giuseppe's foot caught on the base of a stanchion post. He stumbled, the cane went sideways, and his bag swung out before falling. A moment later, he hit the floor with a dull crack. His temple clipped the edge of a steel seat bolted to the wall. Coins spilled and spun on the tile. His cane bounced once and skidded away like it had given up on him, too. For a moment, everything stopped. Giuseppe blinked up at the ceiling lights, dazed, his breath ragged, the side of his head bleeding. I need to go to Rome," he murmured. "The Vatican. Yeah, he's gone. I just want to see him one last time." Then came the laughter. Not a lot, not loud, but enough. A teenager near the charging station snickered and raised his phone. A flash lit up Giuseppe's face as he lay on his side, eyes blinking against the light. Somewhere, someone whispered, "He's bleeding." But no one moved to help. 3 security guards showed up within minutes. Tall, built like brick walls, buzz cuts under black caps. They didn't ask questions. One of them grabbed Giuseppe by the collar of his coat like he was pulling a sack of potatoes. Another scooped the bag with one hand and tossed it aside. The third stood back, arms crossed, as if this was routine. "Time to go, old man." "No! Please! No!" Giuseppe pleaded, struggling weakly. His arms flailed, as if trying to grab the air, or perhaps time itself. One hand clenched as if still holding his cane. The other waved in front of the crowd. No one came forward. "I have to go to Vatican," he sobbed. "You don't understand. He saved me. 30 years ago, he wrote to me." His words were choked in sobs. His face was red with shame more than pain. "Shut it!" one of the guards snapped. Another drew back his fist, knuckles cracking. And that's when it happened. From the edge of the terminal, past the vending machines and the ticket kiosks, a voice sliced through the noise. "Let go of him." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was sharp. Sharp enough to cut through the buzz of travel and self-importance that had wrapped the space like a fog. "Let him go. Right now." The guards turned. So did the crowd. A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed not in airport uniform or a traveler's clothes, but in a striking red and yellow uniform, one that didn't belong to the airline or the terminal. His steps were calm, deliberate. Luca, a Swiss guard, even out of place, he looked like he belonged to a purpose bigger than any flight schedule. He walked straight toward them, his face unreadable, but his eyes steady. "Release him," he repeated. The first guard hesitated. "Who the hell are you?" Luca didn't blink. "I'm from the Vatican, and that man," he pointed to Giuseppe still on the floor, "is coming with me." "Let him go," Luca said again, his voice just above a whisper now, but firm like iron through burlap. The security men hesitated, confused. They weren't trained for this kind of thing. Someone walking in looking like a Roman fresco come to life, speaking in a tone that made you remember your manners. "He's not cleared to fly," one of them muttered, but his hands were already unclenching. "That's not your call anymore," Luca answered, his eyes flicking down to Giuseppe, then back up again. "Now let go." They did. Not because they were sure they should, but because they weren't sure they could stop whatever this was. Giuseppe collapsed back into the chair behind him, body shaking in places even he had forgotten could tremble. His breath wheezed as he tried to speak, but no words came out. His cane had been kicked too far to reach, and his bag now lay by the counter, its contents half spilled like a broken promise. Luca crouched slowly, one knee to the floor, moving like a man used to handling fragile things, sacred books, stained glass memories, wounded souls. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small white cloth, folded neatly, the kind that smelled of lavender soap and discipline. Gently, he pressed it to the side of Giuseppe's forehead, where a thin trickle of blood had started down toward his cheek. "You're okay," he said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you now." Giuseppe's lips moved, struggling to find shape around old pain. "I just wanted to see him, one last time, before he—" His voice broke. Luca nodded once, the way men do when they understand more than words can explain. "Tell me why," he said. "Tell me what brought you here." Giuseppe's fingers gripped the edges of his seat like he might fall off the earth otherwise. For a moment, he stared straight ahead, not at Luca, but through him, into a memory he hadn't touched in years. Then, slowly, he spoke. "He wrote to me once. The Pope." Giuseppe's voice steadied, like old fire catching dry wood. He looked up now, locking eyes with Luca. The words hung in the air like a small miracle, untouched and unchallenged. Luca stood slowly. His face didn't move, but something in his eyes shifted. Something deep, flickering. He turned toward the airline clerk, who had taken half a step back from his counter. "I need 2 seats on the next flight to Vatican City," Luca said. "First available. Window or aisle, I don't care. Make it happen." The man blinked, looking between Luca and the mess behind him. "That's not exactly how this—" Luca didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I'm not asking." The clerk swallowed, nodded once, and started typing. His fingers suddenly remembered how to move fast. "I've got 2 open on the 6:40 flight," he mumbled. "But they're premium seats. Expensive. I didn't ask about the price." Luca pulled out a black leather wallet from inside his coat. His ID slid into view, an official card with Vatican insignia. He laid it down calmly and followed it with a thick fold of bills. It was more than enough. Giuseppe tried to protest. "You don't need to." But Luca turned back to him, quietly placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're the reason I'm here." The seats were booked. The system beeped. The clerk handed over the boarding passes with the stiff hands of a man who'd forgotten which part of his job involved humility. He didn't say sorry, but he didn't speak again, either. While the rest of the terminal returned to its rituals, children crying, wheels squeaking, overhead calls repeating gate changes, Luca and Giuseppe moved to the side, away from the counter, toward a quiet row of chairs by a dusty vending machine. They sat, not saying much at first, just breathing, just letting the heat of the moment settle into the cooler folds of time. Giuseppe rubbed his palms together, still trembling faintly. "Why did you step in?" he asked. "You didn't know me." Luca didn't answer right away. He stared out across the terminal, at the people rushing nowhere fast. Then, without looking back, he said, "Because someone once stood between me and the edge, too." They sat in silence then, not awkward, not heavy, just true. Giuseppe smiled, faint but real. "He saved both of us." Luca nodded. "Maybe that's why we had to meet today." The loudspeaker overhead called their gate. Boarding in 30 minutes. Giuseppe looked down at the boarding pass in his hand like it was a gift from a long-lost friend. He shook his head, still not fully believing. "I've never been on a plane," he said. "You'll be fine," Luca answered. "We'll fly together." The plane had been in the air for a little over 20 minutes, rising slow and steady through pale gray skies that had nothing dramatic to say. Outside the window, there was nothing to see. just a blanket of white mist stretched out like old bed sheets, wrinkled in patches where the sun tried to burn through but hadn't yet succeeded. Inside the cabin, it was quiet in that particular way morning flights often are. People slept with open mouths and slumped necks. Magazines were left unread on trays. Some passengers scrolled idly through screens they barely looked at. Others just stared out, lost in thoughts they didn't speak aloud. Giuseppe sat upright, clutching his seat arms like they might vanish if he let go. Flying was foreign to him. The whirring sound of the engines, the little dips and jolts, it all felt unnatural. He had lived over 80 years close to the ground, and up here, he couldn't shake the feeling that the earth had let him go for good. Across the aisle, Luca sat with his hands folded in his lap, quiet as a chapel, his eyes not on the clouds, but on the old man beside him. He watched the way Giuseppe's lips moved slightly, as if whispering prayers. Or maybe names. Or maybe just the word thank you over and over again to no one in particular. After a while, Luca leaned in, his voice barely above a murmur. "You okay?" Giuseppe turned slowly. He nodded, though the nod was more about manners than truth. "I'm all right," he said. "Just not used to this sort of thing. Airplanes, I mean. Never had reason to." Luca smiled, just enough to soften the line of his jaw. Most people don't, until they do. There was a pause, long enough for the sound of someone coughing 2 rows back to fill the silence. Then Luca spoke again, slower this time. "I didn't always wear this uniform," he said. "Didn't always believe in much either." Giuseppe turned slightly in his seat. His expression didn't ask questions. It simply opened like a door waiting to be walked through. Luca continued. "I used to think I'd die before 30, the kind of life I lived. I didn't see another way out." The engine hummed louder for a second, then settled. "I was 23 when I hit bottom," Luca said. "Hooked bad, drinking myself sick, sleeping wherever I didn't get kicked out of. I stole from my brother, took money from my mother's purse, anything. Just to get high or drunk enough to stop hearing the voice in my head saying I was a mistake." Giuseppe didn't say anything. He just let the man talk. "One day, I ended up in a church, some outreach center in Zurich. I was only there for the food, to be honest, but this priest told me someone important was coming to speak. I didn't care. I was cold and hungry. I stayed in the back." He paused, his hand absently rubbing the corner of his seat cushion. "And then he walked in. Francis. He wasn't Pope then. Not yet. Just a man in a simple cassock, face older than mine is now. He didn't talk about sin or damnation. He talked about being seen, about how shame eats us alive from the inside out. And then he said something that I still remember word for word." Luca turned and looked Giuseppe full in the face. He said, "God has not walked away from you. You just stopped turning toward him." Giuseppe blinked, his own breath catching at the words. Luca's voice grew quieter. "Afterwards, I waited around. I didn't know what I'd say. I didn't think he'd talk to me. But he did. He looked me in the eye and said, 'Chua Chubajo Roy Ba Khan.' He spoke to me in Vietnamese." Giuseppe gave a surprised look. Luca half smiled. "I told him I wasn't Vietnamese." He laughed. Then he switched to Italian. "Told me I was trying too hard to disappear and not hard enough to be found." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet 2 men could share only if they'd both been to hell and lived to crawl out. "He hugged me," Luca said, almost under his breath. "Right there. I stank. I hadn't showered in days. I cried like a boy. And he said, 'There's a center nearby, run by people I trust. Go tonight. Don't wait until tomorrow. There might not be a tomorrow.'" Giuseppe stared at him, hands now resting easier on the arms of his seat. "I went," Luca said. "I stayed. I got clean. It took time, more time than I thought I had. But I made it out. I found my way back. And I swore. If I could ever protect what that man stood for, I would. Giuseppe looked down at his own hands, spotted with age, nails thick and curved from farm work. He took a slow breath, as if drawing something up from deep inside. I was 38, he said. My wife had died 2 winters before. Fever, fast and cruel, left me with 3 children and a patch of land that barely grew weeds. His voice was slow, deliberate. He wasn't used to talking this long. I was a proud man, too proud. I tried to keep everything together. But the rains didn't come. The money dried up faster. One day I thought, maybe it'd be better for them if I wasn't around. That's a dark thought to think when your kids are still asking you for bread. He looked up now, eyes not watery, but focused. There was a small radio in the sacristy. The priest used it to play mass when he was sick. I turned it on. Just noise at first. Then a voice, rough, honest. He was talking about a father who nearly gave up. How that father kept going, not because he wanted to, but because his children still needed him to. Luca nodded slowly. I wrote a letter, Giuseppe said. Didn't think much would come of it. Just needed to say it out loud to someone. I mailed it to Argentina. Didn't expect a reply. Why would he answer someone like me? He swallowed. 3 months later, I got a letter back. It came with a money order. Not much, but more than I had. And one line in handwriting that was a little messy but kind. Luca didn't blink. He wrote, Giuseppe an langoy man me, hey tiptuk, vi con kai an va vichua. Luca whispered the translation, softly. You are strong, keep going, for your children and for God. Giuseppe nodded. That money bought me seed for planting. That crop fed us that winter, paid off the loan on the tractor. I never looked back after that. Raised my kids, buried one, saw 2 married, lived quiet but good. I owe that man more than words. He stared out the window but saw nothing beyond the mist. I owed him a thank you, and I never got the chance to say it. Luca reached out and rested a hand gently over Giuseppe's. The gesture was wordless, steady, and more sacred than any sermon. Now you will, he said. They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, nothing more to say. Not every act of redemption needs a choir. Not every story needs applause. Sometimes 2 men, one old, one once lost, sitting side by side on a morning flight bound for Vatican City, their hearts held up by memory and mercy, are all the light the world needs. And in that plane, somewhere between earth and sky, between past and now, they carried the quiet kind of love that never announces itself, but never dies. The plane touched down on the runway with a shudder and a drawn-out sigh, like some giant bird finally coming to rest. The wheels groaned against the tarmac, and the fuselage trembled once more before stilling. In that moment, Giuseppe opened his eyes, not because of the jolt, but because of what waited just beyond it. His fingers unclenched slowly from the armrests, his knuckles pale and tight. He hadn't spoken since the stories, hadn't needed to. Something in the silence had told the rest. Luca helped him stand once the aisle cleared. No one rushed them. Most folks were still waking up, collecting bags, moving in that tired, mechanical way of travelers who don't yet feel the gravity of where they've landed. But Giuseppe, he felt it. Every step down the aisle toward the plane's door was careful, not just because of his knees or the cane or the sloped floor, but because something sacred had already begun. He didn't say so out loud. He just paused, right before stepping off, and whispered one small word under his breath. Grazie. Outside, the wind in Rome was cooler than expected for the season. The air had a crispness to it, touched by a kind of solemn quiet that didn't match the usual rush of airport surroundings. Even the sky looked different. Not gray, not blue, just wide and still. There was a car waiting. Luca didn't say how. Vatican arrangements, maybe. Or maybe it just found them. Either way, no time was wasted. They drove through streets Giuseppe had only ever seen in books or on faded TV sets mounted above the village bar, where the signal crackled and someone was always muttering that the Pope looked older than last time. Now there were no screens, only stone and wind, and the sound of a city that had stopped rushing, if only for a day. They arrived at the edge of St. Peter's Square just after 9. The crowd was already there, thick, unmoving, a mass of human stillness. Giuseppe stepped out of the car and stood there, cane in one hand, the other braced gently on the doorframe. He looked ahead, not for a place to sit, not for a program or schedule. He looked for something he didn't know how to name, but when he found it, he nodded once, very slowly. The square stretched wide before him, filled edge to edge with people. Some stood, some knelt, some wept. But none of them spoke loud. It was like the entire world had learned to whisper in unison. Not because they were told to, but because silence, in its rarest form, is something people remember how to do when they're standing in the presence of grace. There, at the center, was the casket. Simple, wooden, not covered in gold, not set on some glowing platform, just laid before the people, before God, with the quiet dignity that marked the man it held. Giuseppe didn't try to push forward, didn't ask to move closer. He stood where he was, on the edge of the crowd, as steady as his old legs would allow, and let the stillness carry him the rest of the way. Beside him, Luca didn't speak. He didn't need to. They stood together, two men from different lifetimes, bound not by blood, but by something far harder to define. Giuseppe took a slow, trembling breath, and his lips moved again. "Thank you, Your Holiness." It was soft. Not a cry, not a plea, just a farewell spoken in full heart. No show, no tears meant to be seen, just words offered like prayer. "For giving me a reason to live." His cane shifted slightly, his grip tightening, not because he was about to fall, but because he wanted to stand longer, to give this moment its full due. He said no more. He didn't have to. Luca placed a hand gently on Giuseppe's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture born of comfort. It was recognition. Shared loss. Shared gratitude. It said, simply, "I know." He looked out over the crowd, at the thousands of bowed heads, the candles held high in the early light, the faces of those who had traveled from every corner of the earth, all for the same reason. Not because of ceremony, not because of obligation, but because they had been changed by the man now laid before them, some in small ways, others in ways that saved their lives. Giuseppe's lips barely moved again. This time the words didn't leave him, they stayed tucked just behind his tongue. But Luca saw the look in his eyes. He saw what they held. Peace. That's what it was. Giuseppe wasn't searching anymore. He wasn't fighting or pleading or waiting. He had come, and the man who once saved him without ever laying eyes on him was now being honored not with speeches or parades, but with the quiet thanks of a million souls just like his. The square held them, steady as a mother holds a child. Hours passed. No one counted them. When the bells of St. Peter's rang out, the sound moved through the bodies like breath. It lifted faces, not in alarm, but in understanding. A holy sound, not deafening, not sharp, just clear. Luca looked down at Giuseppe, whose eyes were closed now, not in sleep, but in stillness. Not crying, just still. The casket didn't move. The Pope wouldn't rise. But something else did. It rose in the hush of the morning, in the joined hands of strangers, in the shoulders leaning gently together, in the words whispered into wind. Thank you. When they finally turned to leave, slow, step by step, with no rush to return to the noise of the world, it wasn't sadness they carried. It was something heavier and lighter all at once. A torch, a legacy, and they didn't carry it alone. They never had. They never would. The square was behind them now, though neither of them said much on the walk back. The crowds had started to thin, but the air still held that strange kind of quiet, the kind that lingers after prayer or mourning or a long-needed goodbye. Luca walked one step behind Giuseppe, more out of instinct than courtesy. He didn't hover, he just watched. The old man moved slow but sure, with each footfall deliberate, almost reverent, as if every inch of stone beneath his shoes deserved to be remembered. They didn't take a cab. Giuseppe had said he preferred to walk. "I want to feel the city," he'd told Luca, "not ride past it like a ghost." So they walked, past fountains and stone pillars, under balconies draped in flowers, through alleys where shadows stretched long and quiet. Luca carried the small canvas bag for him, even though Giuseppe had insisted he could manage. "It's not heavy," he'd said. "I know," Luca replied, "but I still want to carry it." They reached a modest guest house just off a narrow side street. The sign outside had long since faded, the paint chipped at the corners. It was the kind of place most travelers walked past without noticing, but Giuseppe looked at it like it was enough. Inside, the woman at the desk greeted them in a low voice, like she already knew what they were there for. She handed over a key without asking many questions, as if she'd seen this before. A man with a soft heart and a tired walk, carrying more weight than he should, looking for nothing more than a place to rest. Giuseppe thanked her and turned to Luca. "This is where we part, I suppose," he said. Luca hesitated. "I can stay a bit longer. Make sure you're settled." "No," Giuseppe shook his head. "You've done enough. More than enough." He reached out then, not with hesitation, but with a kind of clarity that only comes when you know the moment might not come again. His hand found Luca's, old skin against young, the grip stronger than expected. "Thank you," he said, voice cracking just slightly at the edge. "It's because of you I was able to be there today, to stand in that square, to speak my goodbye." Luca smiled gently. "You didn't need me. You just needed to be seen." Giuseppe nodded. His eyes didn't well with tears, but something in them shimmered, maybe the reflection of the streetlight, or maybe something else entirely. "I saw him in you," Giuseppe said, almost whispering now. "A piece of him. Maybe the best piece. The part that listens, that reaches out." They stood like that for a moment longer. Then Luca squeezed his hand once and stepped back. "I'll be nearby for a little while longer," he said. "If you need anything." "I have what I need," Giuseppe said. "Now go. Someone out there's waiting for you to notice them." That made Luca smile again, wider this time. He gave a short nod, turned, and left. The room was small but clean. Giuseppe didn't turn on the light. He liked the way the dusk fell in through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor like someone had painted prayers there with shadows. He sat by the window, slow and careful, then opened his coat pocket and pulled out the old rosary. His fingers found the beads easily, the muscle memory still there even when names and numbers slipped from him these days. He didn't pray aloud, just held the shape of the prayers in his mouth, letting them rest there like warm bread. When the last bead slipped through his hand, he reached for the notebook he always carried, the one with a cracked spine and pages that smelled faintly of time. He opened it, flipped to a blank space near the end, and wrote slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because the moment deserved slowness. "I came. I saw the crowd. I felt the hush. I didn't touch the casket. Didn't need to. He was everywhere. In the faces, in the silence, in the boy who cried beside his father, in the woman holding a candle that trembled even when the wind was still. And I met Luca, a man carrying a different kind of burden. But in him, I saw the same light that once reached me in the dark. He gave me his strength when mine had run low. He gave me room to stand, and in doing so, he gave me something more important than comfort. He gave me faith. I will spend the rest of my days with that in mind. Not loudly, not with banners, just quietly. The way I lived, the way he taught. One act at a time. Giuseppe closed the notebook, sat in the dark a little while longer. Then he bowed his head. "Thank you, Lord," he said aloud, just once, "for not forgetting me." Back across the city, in a quiet room near the Swiss Guard compound, Luca sat alone at a desk. His uniform hung neatly on the chair behind him, the bright colors folded with care. He stared at a blank email window on his laptop for a long time before typing the first word. The letter wasn't long, but it came from the center of him. To the editors of the Catholic Chronicle, I am not a man of letters. I do not often write for papers. But I feel compelled to share something I witnessed in these past days, not because it made headlines, but because it won't. I met a man named Giuseppe. He came alone, from a village whose name you wouldn't know. He traveled with a broken cane, a patched-up bag, and the kind of determination that shame and time can't kill. He came to say goodbye to the Holy Father, not out of routine, but out of love. Years ago, Pope Francis changed this man's life in a way no one ever saw. And now, in his final days, Giuseppe came to offer a thank you the world would never hear. He was nearly turned away, laughed at, moved aside like a burden. But the grace in his eyes, the weight of his story, I carry it now. When true kindness touches someone, it doesn't need to be remembered by crowds. It doesn't need to be documented. It just needs to be passed on. That's what I saw. That's what I'll carry. Luca read it over once, then hit send. And in that quiet room, surrounded by uniforms and folded cloth, he breathed deeper than he had in months. Later that night, both men, miles apart but tied by something deeper than location, slept soundly. Not because all their pain was gone, but because they had stood inside something real, and that was enough. They didn't share the same past. They wouldn't walk the same future. But they had lived something together. And some things, when felt fully, leave a peace that hums like a low hymn long after the last word has been said. 1 week later, Giuseppe stepped off the village bus the same way he'd boarded it. Slow, deliberate, cane first. The ride back home had been quiet. The same hills rolled past the window, the same olive groves, the same cracked roads that knew his footsteps better than anyone still living in the town. But something in him had shifted. The lines on his face hadn't changed, but the weight behind them had. It wasn't lighter, just more at peace. The man who greeted him at the stop was a neighbor, a few years younger, with a sun-creased face and a voice that always sounded like gravel in a tin cup. "You went, huh?" Giuseppe nodded. "I did." They didn't hug, just touched hands for a second and walked slowly toward the edge of the village. Children ran across the stone courtyard near the fountain, where an old bench still leaned slightly to one side. One of them, a girl with thick curls and bare feet, saw Giuseppe and shouted something in delight. "Grandpa Giuseppe's home!" His grandchildren came next, 2 boys and a girl, all with cheeks full of summer, arms wide open. They didn't ask about Rome or the plane or the crowds. They didn't have to. They just pulled at his sleeves, tugged at his cane, and begged for stories. And that evening, he gave them one. He sat under the mulberry tree in the backyard, a blanket over his knees. The children gathered like small campfires around him. "I saw a great many people," he began, "more than I've ever seen in one place. Some from far away, some from right down the road. All of us came to say goodbye." He told them about the crowd that didn't push, about the silence that wasn't empty, about the bells that rang like someone whispering God's name from the rooftops. He told them about the kindness of a man named Luca, who stood when others walked away. "But wasn't it sad?" one of the boys asked. Giuseppe looked out toward the hills, where the last light of day sat low and golden on the ridge. "No," he said quietly. "Not sad. Not in the way you think. It was like standing in a place where every heavy thing inside you just sits down for a while." The children didn't fully understand, but they understood enough. They crawled into his lap one by one until he was surrounded by warmth and questions and the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be heard. Later that night, when the house had gone still and the moon pressed its light through the shutters, Giuseppe sat at his little table and picked up the same notebook he'd carried to Rome. He flipped to a fresh page. Today, I told them, my grandchildren. I didn't speak about death or power or religion. I spoke about kindness, about a man who reached across a railing to hold a stranger's hand, about another who once gave a poor farmer just enough to believe again, about quiet gestures that never make the news but change everything anyway. I don't know how many years I've got left, but I do know how I want to spend them. Being a good neighbor, listening longer, giving when I can, even if it's just my time, because that's how the world gets built again. Not in cathedrals or parliaments, but in backyards and at bus stops, and on old benches where two people remember what it means to be seen. Thank you, Lord, for the chance to go, for the eyes to see, for a story worth coming home with. He closed the book gently. Across the sea, back in Rome, Luca stood guard again. The new pope had stepped into his role only days earlier. Things moved fast behind those ancient walls. Schedules, meetings, letters. But for Luca, something still moved slower than all that. Each time he took his post outside the apostolic palace, the words came back, the ones that had pulled him from the dark. God never walked away from you. He repeated them now, quiet and inward, like a habit worn smooth by time. The tourists didn't notice. They snapped pictures, pointed, whispered. But none of them knew that the man in the red and gold uniform was thinking about a farmer from the south, and the walk they took through the square, and what it meant to believe again, not in institutions, but in mercy. That night, after his shift, Luca passed the statue of St. Peter the Apostle. He paused, not long, not showy, just enough. There were flowers there, candles, notes scribbled in a dozen languages. He added nothing, but he stood still for a moment, remembering. In the silence, he whispered, "Thank you," not to the statue, but to the space around it. And then he moved on. He didn't speak about Giuseppe to anyone else, didn't post about it, didn't tell the other guards. He carried it like something precious, quiet, personal. A light not for show, but for direction. And slowly, without fanfare, the story made its way. A nurse in Rome told it to her brother. A priest mentioned it in a homily about unseen goodness. A teacher in the village wrote it into a lesson about modern saints. Nobody used Giuseppe's name, nobody knew Luca's. But that was never the point. The story lived, not as a headline, but as a reminder. That grace comes in quiet, that kindness travels further than we ever see, that sometimes the most important farewells are whispered, not shouted. Back in the village, weeks passed. One morning, Giuseppe woke early. The air was cooler than usual. Autumn had begun its slow turn. He stepped outside, wrapped in his shawl, cane in hand, and looked up at the sky. He didn't speak. He just stood there, as still as the hills around him, breathing in the morning and feeling, if only for a moment, that he'd done what he needed to do. In his heart, a small ember still glowed. Not dramatic, not loud, just alive. Hey friends, if you've stayed with me until this moment, thank you, from the bottom of my heart. This story, it wasn't just about an old man trying to board a plane. It was about something much deeper. It was about how mercy finds us, sometimes in our lowest, quietest moments, when we feel invisible, forgotten. And how even the smallest act of kindness, like listening or standing up for someone, can become life-changing. What touched me the most was not just Giuseppe's devotion, but how Pope Francis reached across distance and time to offer hope to two completely different people, Giuseppe and Luca. He didn't just lead with words, he led with compassion. And that, to me, is the kind of legacy we should carry forward. This story reminds us that human dignity doesn't depend on status, wealth, or power. It lives in the way we treat each other when no one is watching, in the quiet prayers, the silent gestures. That's where God shows up. So tonight, let's take a moment to pray for Pope Francis. Whether you're Catholic or not, I invite you to join me in saying, "Thank you, Holy Father, for showing us the face of mercy." And if this story moved you even a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what part of the story stayed with you the most? Have you ever had someone show up for you like Luca did for Giuseppe? Let's keep this light alive, together. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one.